Hi everyone, thank you for attending my webinar today on understanding student sentiment and managing their success during COVID-19. With me on the webinar is my colleague Betty, and she will be managing the meeting platform and handling any questions that folks might have. We just ask that just feel free to type in your questions, but we'll address them at the end of the session from one by one. The webinar is being recorded, but we're not going to call anybody's names during question and answering. So just a little bit about myself. I've been a director of institutional research for just short of a decade now. I was first at John F. Kennedy University in San Francisco, and then again in Seattle. I moved to Seattle to join Baxter University. During that time, I also served on an accreditation team twice for WASC. My background, I'm an economist by training. I did my undergraduate at the University of British Columbia, and I did my master's in agricultural economics at the University of Guelph. I am the founder and CEO of Kai Analytics and Survey Research Incorporated. We're 2 years old now, and we're now a team of 4. So let's begin with research scope. So we conducted this study, and it ended on March 27th. It was conducted during the first week back from spring break between March 23rd and March 27th. The reason we did the survey so early is that we really wanted to capture the students' initial impressions of this transition and how it's affected their academic and kind of their life. The total sample size was 454 undergraduate students across the US. The estimated margin of error is about 5% based on the 2019 total undergraduate enrollment, which is about 21 million undergraduate students. For this project specifically, we targeted student as an employment status for respondents aged 18 to 30, which we felt were the most likely group to be undergraduate students. Respondents then had to further qualify themselves as undergraduate students through the following screening questions. First, we asked them are you currently enrolled in a 2-year or 4-year undergraduate program at a college or university in the US? And then second, we asked them, have your on-site courses migrated to an online or virtual format as a result of the COVID-19 virus? So the whole purpose is to focus on undergraduate students and only those who are on-site and now on an online and virtual program. We didn't include any students that were already in a fully online program. And our goal was to reach as a broad and representative an audience as possible. Therefore, the panels are recruited via many outlets. The top recruitment resources are social media platforms such as Facebook and LinkedIn. And the respondents were incentivized for completing the survey. So they were either paid with a PayPal gift card or we made a donation to their school. We also, because we're kind of incentivizing the survey, we also paid attention for quality check. We did a couple of techniques to check that people are really paying attention and answering the survey thoroughly. So we looked closely at the length of time it took them to complete the survey, and we filtered out any responses that were very, very short, like too short to really go through the survey. We also had an attention catching question in the middle of the survey, which just simply asked for multiple choice, the respondent, what's the opposite of the word sad, which is happy, and there's disappointed, upset, angry, and that helped us kind of make sure we're only getting responses that are that have kind of read the questions and answered thoroughly. So actually we collected over 700 responses, but because of our kind of stringent filtering, the total final response numbers was 454. This heat map here shows you where the responses came from. The top 5 reporting states came from California at 14%, followed by New York at 13%, Texas at 6%, Florida 6%, and Michigan at 4%. Altogether, the top 5 states accounted for 43% of all the responses. And the remaining states, though, were relatively evenly distributed, as you can see on the heat map. Unfortunately, we weren't able to collect any responses from Montana, North Dakota, Virginia, and New Mexico, but we hope that when we do a follow-up on this survey, we'll be able to capture some of those states. In the next couple of slides, we'll be focusing on the 3 main open-ended questions we asked our respondents. So let's go there now. So this is the first question we asked. We used a method called Net Promoter Score, or NPS, to measure satisfaction on a scale from -100 to +100. So in NPS, the score above 0 is actually considered good, indicating that the majority of your stakeholders are satisfied with your services or product, and scores approaching +100 indicates strong levels of satisfaction. And scores below 0 tell an organization that folks are dissatisfied overall. So if you take a look at the top row of this graph, let me just highlight it. Overall, we found the sentiment to be -5 points. Well, this is not good, but it's actually not terrible given the current environment and situation we're in. If you focus on the blue, kind of the blue color of the stack graph, you'll notice that students that are further along their studies, first year, second year, third year, and fourth year, are actually a little bit more satisfied, are generally more satisfied than students who are just beginning their degrees, first year freshmen. So first year freshman is a -20, improves steadily, and then becomes +16 as a fourth year senior student. In the next slide, we'll go into the reason why this is the case. So we looked at all the open-ended responses, and we can attribute the lower sentiment reported by the first-year students to a loss of the formative on-campus experience, along with their concern about how this disruption might affect their grades. On the other hand, fourth-year students are likely to have higher levels of satisfaction because they have the most experience with setting academic goals and staying focused in order to get the work done to graduate. So these are actual quotes that we received from the responses, and it kind of shows at the quality of the responses we're able to collect, and kind of gives you also the sense of what we were asking and what we're able to collect. So here on the left-hand side, first-year student, 19 years old from Washington, and on the right-hand side, just to compare, fourth-year student, 23 years old from Kentucky. And I'll just read one for those of you who might be on the call. Fourth-year student saying, the teachers are working very hard to do all they can. It just will never be as beneficial as being in class. And the first-year student, I don't have the same experience as I would get in a classroom. I basically have to teach the material to myself, which is difficult if you are new to it. Some teachers are also not as helpful as others or don't know how to utilize technology well. This is the second question we asked. We asked them, do you plan on remaining enrolled at your current school after this term or semester is finished? And this really gets at the retention concern for institutions. The response, though, is a breath of relief. With some caveats, we remain cautiously optimistic that students on the whole are not likely to drop from their program at this time. Over 90% of respondents say that they intend to remain enrolled after this term or semester is finished. And it appears that despite the disruption on their way of life and routine, students across academic years seem to recognize the extraordinary situation we're in. A small group of respondents actually voiced praise for how their school has handled this situation, and we'll show that in a later slide as well. But importantly, though, 10% is still a significant amount of student attrition, especially for institutions that are more sensitive to sudden enrollment shocks. So from our analysis of open-ended comments for those students who are not planning to or unsure if they will remain after this semester, we identify 7 themes. Oh, and before we go forward, some of you submitted a question before registering, and one of the questions is the 10% mentioned in the email in addition to what institution might expect, or would this include the typical churn? So actually, yes, I think this is in addition to what institutions might expect from typical churn. And I'll show you why. So these are the 7 themes we identify from the comments of the non-returning or unsure students. And so despite the general positive finding, the potential attrition of 10% is still very significant. Through thematic analysis and thematic extraction of the open-ended responses, the top issue we found is that students lack academic support. And as we go down the list, that 23% of students lack academic support, 19% are seeking better program offerings. This shows kind of the competitiveness that the institutions might expect to be facing now that kind of traditionally on-site courses will be competing head-to-head with other universities that are fully online. Changes in priorities, moving to another state, concerns around COVID-19, we're just going down the list here, and then concerns around job outlook and program being canceled, like their academic program or some of their their athletic program being canceled, or possibly some academic courses being canceled. Now, it's important to note though, I mean, not all of these are something the institution can address or can intervene. Like if a student has decided to move to another state, and these are just kind of their own decision or changes in their priorities. But it does show that the results here do show that I think schools should focus their retention efforts on definitely building academic support, trying to improve job outlooks, improving communication around how the school is handling programs after this term around COVID-19, and ensuring students are not searching elsewhere for better online programs. The next question we asked is, what additional services could your school be providing you at this time? So I just need a little bit of water. So overall from our research, the top request from students is that institutions restore their academic services. And that's 28% of the response. And when I say academic resources and academic services, what falls under that is we're seeing students requesting tutoring, academic counseling, better e-learning resources, and access to library services. This is followed by emergency services at 17% of responses. And this theme includes financial support, securing housing and shelter, because not all students have unfortunately been able to find a fixed place to stay after being asked to leave their dorms, and more seriously, students needing funds for food. And following behind next is 14% of students are seeking refunds for services that they no longer have access to. This includes dorms, meal plans, parking, extracurricular activities, and other on-site services, as well as tuition to some extent. This is followed by 13% of students who have expressed an interest in reviewing, to having their kind of grading structure reviewed. But I think this request should be approached with a bit of caution, because so a handful of students are requesting to be graded on a pass-fail basis instead of by GPA. And while this might be possible for some programs, institutions need to be aware of the state, federal, and professional, depending on the program, the professional accreditation requirements, because oftentimes there are some rules that dictate the number of courses a student can take as pass-fail. But other requests we're seeing in this section will be a lot easier to address, such as being more flexible with assignment deadlines, and offering alternatives to a final exam. Next, at 12% is communication. And these are students who have a desire for kind of more timely updates from the school around COVID-19, school changes, and what to expect in the coming terms. Some students would also like to hear more from their leadership. And indeed, we're noticing more university leaders sharing their meetings or announcements through social media and YouTube. So I think that's actually a good step forward. At 11% is technology support. There's actually two issues here that we're seeing. First is that some students right now have limited or unreliable internet access because they're studying off campus. So while major US communication companies have begun offering free or discounted internet plans to affected students and qualified low-income customers, not all students might be aware of this. Excuse me. And this might be an example of something helpful to include in your communications with students. The second issue with technology support is that some students have voiced concerns around not having the necessary hardware or know-how to properly address online lessons or learning modules. So to resolve this, students have requested in their comments ways to borrow laptops, tablets, and etc. Next, at 7% are students who currently would like to see more one-on-one time with their professors or instructors. So this would involve a wider discussion with faculty to determine how they can best manage their office hours going forward. And then next, at 6%, 6% here, sorry, is a subset of students who are seeking mental health and counseling support. This group is smaller at 6%, but it's a very distinct group. In our text analysis, anything over 5% of the survey population tends to be important and are often very actionable. And this subset is no exception. Students should be able to access the same level of mental and emotional counseling and the support services along with it as they would have expected on campus. And lastly, as I touched on a little bit earlier, 5% of the responses we received are students who are appreciative of the school's effort in helping them transition during this time. So keep up the good work. In this slide, there's just some example of some news articles we've noticed in the past week. First one's from the US News. It's actually about what to know about pass-fail classes in college. So that's a good article to read. We'll include that in the notes. And here's from the AT&T page around internet program offering. They're offering savings to schools to support e-learning. They're offering funds to support distant learning and connecting families. Sorry, water break. Okay, now we're gonna go through the, so back to the 10% of students who said they're not coming back or they're unsure if they're coming back. It's really important to kind of dig a little bit more. So we broke it out, the themes unique to those students. And we determined that the biggest issue for those who are not coming back or unsure is that the biggest issue from the comments is, well, first they would like more academic services. And I think that's because from what we're seeing is that these students are seeking these support because they might have already been, well, at least their comments have suggested that they might already been struggling students, struggling academically prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. So these students are really seeking additional tutoring or academic support services, as well as relaxation of course or grading requirements. Another big challenge faced by this group of students is access to emergency services like financial support for food and housing, as well as career support for those who may have lost their job. So you can see academic services, 32% for those non-returning and unsure. It's almost a third of the responses, followed by emergency services, review grading structure, technology support. 0% of them have said anything positive about the situation. So as I mentioned, the comments from this group of students suggest they might already be struggling academically prior to COVID-19. So here are just some comments to highlight that. So I'll just read one of them for those who might be on the call. First year student, 19 years old from Texas. I would appreciate if my school would either give us our money back for the time we lost or allow us to do a pass-fail option for our transcripts. Otherwise, I wish they would allow academic counseling online to determine how we can move forward. So the same question about what additional services can your school be providing you. We also filter that by the different academic years for first year, second year, third year, and fourth year students, just to see what remains the top issues they hope they could receive support on. And for the most part, academic services still plays an important, is kind of like the priority for these students. But there's a little bit of, there are differences. For example, second year students are more likely to request emergency service support. Review grading structure continues to play kind of a big part, except for third year students. So this is in our report, and you can go through that slowly. So we took so those are the kind of the three main questions, but so from the results, we took our text analysis one step further, and we wanted to examine how these themes are interrelated, because students don't typically just say one thing. So we want to see how they're interrelated so we can identify kind of distinct student personas. So we don't really do word clouds here at Analytics, but we do. We'll make word clouds if our clients would like them, typically for their social media. But we do word clouds. We usually make like a 2 or 3 word phrase-based word cloud just to give it more context, not just single word clouds. In this case, though, we did a text-based cluster analysis, and this really helps identify the themes. I'm going to highlight them. There's 6, but you can already see how they're grouped together. The point too for doing this is to kind of help institutions, once they've identified what kind of support package to put together, kind of understanding these different groupings and different personas can really, we hope, can help your institution, build more strategic communication going forward and target the concerns more directly. So here's our 6 themes. I circled them in orange. The first one, as you can see, those students who are requesting academic support or academic services are more likely to be the ones also asking for more communication and improved communication. And as you can see, academic services includes tutoring, better e-learning resources, academic counseling, and library. Excuse me. On the bottom left, seeking emergency support, that goes hand in hand with refunds, refunds for services, refunds for tuition, and emergency services include, food, housing and shelter, and financial support. So that's one other persona. On the bottom right, there's those who are, hoping to have have their grading structure reviewed. They're also likely to be the type of students who are also asking for more office hours. In their own standalone group here, just above, is those students who are asking for technology support, and they're kind of distinct on their own. The ones who talk about having technology support or technical support just focus on that one concern. So that includes access to internet and hardware. Next is the satisfied student, those who kind of voice praise of how their institution is handling the situation and helping them transition. So they're their own group. And then lastly, as I mentioned, the students who are seeking mental health and counseling are also their own distinct group. So what we'll do is, so those are what our main findings, and in the next 4 slides, we'll give kind of 4 recommendations on how to move forward and where to go next. So first and foremost, we encourage university and college leadership to work closely with your institutional research office to conduct your own validation surveys of your student population. During a time of crisis, it's more important than ever to practice evidence-based decision-making, conducting a survey now and once again towards the end of the term. This will allow your staff to gauge changes in kind of student sentiment. Second is to remember to catch your breath. At this time, from our results, students are still focused on achieving their academic goals. 90% of students from our survey said that they intend to remain enrolled after this term is over. But however, as I mentioned, if your institution is sensitive to sudden enrollment shocks, then there's three things you should be, you should be mindful of. Kind of first is to address student concerns on a case-by-case basis around, the flexibility of academic support services and grading structure. Next, I think, it's important to understand which programs have higher than average dissatisfaction. So we actually recommend not postponing course evaluations or other planned satisfaction surveys at this time. Instead of postponing them, consider creating like a special section of a special set of questions around COVID-19. Because the more data you have on your students, the more prepared you will be able to address concerns early on. And we encourage you to aim for open-ended responses over fixed choice or quantitative measures. But you'll just have to work with your institutional research office to identify what's feasible given their workload. And next, kind of build strong and clear communications around how COVID-19 may affect the program going forward, and as well as campus operations. As earlier is better. If possible, work with industry partners to provide an outlook on career prospect for students in your program as well. And next, our next recommendation is to delegate the outreach. I think it's important to know that as you roll out your response plan to address these students' concern, it is better to target distinct persona profiles than to have a one-size-fits-all or a very long email. So you can delegate this to the right department. And so we built this table here with the 6 personas we identified and the crosswalk to kind of the typical office you'll see at a university or college. You can also kind of consider setting up, we see a lot of schools setting up a temporary FAQ or landing page where solutions to major concerns can be found easier. And for those of you on the call, this table on the left-hand side are the different persona. So for example, persona 1, academic services and communications. The relevant department would be Office of Student Affairs, Office of the Provost, and Office of the President. And down on persona 5, for example, mental health and emotion support, that would go along with student counseling centers on campus. The last recommendation is about text analysis, which is what we specialize in. Because language is so nuanced, it's so nuanced, and not only that, each institution has their own kind of culture and their own programs and their own kind of acronyms. When we are doing our analysis for different schools, we actually kind of tailor and customize our models for each institution. So no two models are exactly alike, and we do that in Python. But without having to kind of be that complicated, there are just 3 tips you can make your analysis of open-ended questions a lot easier. The first one is to make sure your open-ended questions are succinct. So try not to kind of ask more than one question within an open-ended kind of question. Sorry for lack of a better word, but for example, sometimes we see institutions trying to shorten the length of their survey. So when it comes to open-ended questions, they put one in the end saying any other comments or anything. But that is actually going to give you add a lot of time to analysis, because now you're going to collect responses, open-ended responses, mind you, from every single question you've asked on the survey. So instead, try your best to kind of break out the open-ended questions to each specific section. The other thing is some surveys I've seen, people combine like, oh, what did you like or didn't like about this survey? The problem with that is, well, once you get the results, you're going to have positive and negative sentences within your response column. And it's possible, like we can break that out for you by scoring it by sentiment, each sentence as positive and negative, but instead think about using, net promoter score, so that you can at least filter out, 9 and 10s are positive, 7 and 8s are neutral, and anything below 6 or lower are negative. The next thing is to note that, sometimes themes that only account for 5 to 20% of your responses, they're actually more actionable than those that are higher, like 40%. A good example is, for example, course evaluations. If you just do kind of a broad stroke analysis of the open-ended response on a course evaluation survey, you'll probably quickly find that many students complain about too much homework or too much reading, but that's not something institutions need to intervene, because tough luck, you're a student. That's your job. But at the 5 to 20% is where things get more interesting and they're actually more actionable. For example, we've seen, at a 7% range, students kind of complaining that the URLs for this online module or for this course is broken or outdated. Or another example is students in a nursing program feeling that a particular course, their learning outcome doesn't really align with their what was laid out in the course outcome. So again, they're not like the whole population, but they're actually very actionable, and these are things you can highlight in your email to show, continuous improvement. Show how you're addressing continuous improvement. And lastly, for text analysis, just be aware of institutional lingo, acronyms, and terminology. One thing we noticed in the past was an institution has a program called START program. Without knowing the context, I was like, oh, there's a lot of students starting something. What are they starting? Then I realized, no, START was a kind of an early college program to encourage high school students to take college level courses early on to help them graduate quicker. Oh, and sorry, and lastly, community resources. The Assess listserv out of Kentucky has a breadth of information that the community has put together. The one you're seeing now is a publicly shared, publicly kind of collaborative Google Sheet that has a bank of all these questions that you can ask your students around the COVID-19 concerns and how it affects online learning. So I'll share that link as well in the email for everyone who's registered. And this is just put together by the community. So this is, I can't take any credit for this, but this is a really amazing tool. So thank you to that community. And now next, if you just indulge me a little bit, this is just a word from our sponsor. So about Analytics, we're a market research company based in Vancouver with 4 main core competencies. We do survey design, data processing, and automation. And what that entails often is we just help automate the process of getting surveys out without a lot of intervention. So when, we can build pipelines so that when students reach a certain point in the term, we can send out a course evaluation survey to them automatically without any other separate tool. We can just leverage your existing SurveyMonkey or Survey or Qualtrics account. Text analysis is our main focus. And so we use natural language processing customized to each institution to quickly analyze large amounts of student feedback. And as I mentioned, it's really more than just a word cloud. We do cluster analysis, we do segmentation analysis, and so forth. So these are all the institutions we've had the privilege to help in the past year. So thank you so much for our supporters. And an example of what we do well, here we analyzed a large data set of financial aid complaints, and we've quickly found that in 2018 compared to 2017, the biggest issue were clients receiving bad information about their loans and trouble with how their payments are being handled, student loan payments, that is. We've recently started doing analysis of campus climate surveys, and as folks know, campus climate surveys are handled a little bit differently. They're a much more sensitive survey. And so what we were able to do here was to segment the analysis to allow the institution to identify concerns across different subpopulations. In this case, we looked at the responses from person of color versus person a non-person of color. and then identify where the concerns lay between the two. And here in this example, promoting open discussion and protecting privacy was a big issue for person of color, more so than a non-person of color. And what that has done, for example, is that for our client, they know that for their next 3-year plan, they will focus on promoting open discussion and protecting privacy. We also conduct live interviews. So we have interviewed students in the past, kind of aggregated. We interviewed their students, took all the transcriptions, analyzed that for the text, identify over 180 traits, and then build 4 personas around that of kind of an ideal prospective students for the admissions and marketing team. And we do reports very well. We make beautiful reports thanks to our graphic designer. And they're very heavy on infographic elements. And our clients like that because not only do they have a report, but they can use each of the images separately for a catchy social media campaign. So thank you so much. I'm ready to open up the chat for questions. And yes, if anyone's interested in collaborations, we're very interested in seeking partnerships with institutions that have maybe some or a lot of open-ended questions that they haven't had a lot of time to analyze. We're happy to work with you to tap into that and bring out some valuable insight. And lastly, I have a lot of passion towards student research and student insight. So if you have any more questions outside of this chat, feel free to email me at kevin@kaianalytics.com. Our website is kaianalytics.com. And if you go /education, you'll get some case studies directly relevant to higher ed. And lastly, for those of you who are interested in Python or who are very knowledgeable about Python, from a journey person to a master coder, if you want to geek out with me sometimes and my colleague or my co-host, I should say, feel free to visit us at www.pythonoutloud.com. So thank you very much. I'm going to pause the recording now and we'll answer the questions that have come in. Thank you.